The Deep South's oldest rivalry. You got Georgia going to Jordan-Hare. This is going to be an electric environment. 3:30 Eastern on CBS. Georgia favored by 14.5 points. The line's been a little bit tricky now. Hasn't always been 14.5. I believe it opened at somewhere around 16, favoring Georgia, gone down to 14.5. I don't know what Vegas knows. I don't pretend to know what Vegas knows. I do know that we're going to have our gambling picks for you on my Instagram at Jody Pickell. Don't know that we'll include this one. Regardless, we'll give you our pick in this one as well as our pick against that number. But for Georgia, man, this is the kind of game where you handle business. Like, that's what they're feeling like internally. Like, you should have your undivided attention every single game on your opponent. But now in this spot, you had a slow start against UAB, had a slow start against South Carolina. Now you're on the road in a rivalry atmosphere. This is the game where you got to be dialed in. I expect and hope for, if you're a Georgia fan, a quick start from the Dogs. And for Carson Beck, this is the stress test for him. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but this is his first real test on the road against an SEC opponent. I cannot wait to see how he responds, because there's been a lot of critics around what the offense hasn't done, even with how many points they've scored. There's been a little bit of criticism around him not pushing the ball downfield and the offense taking a while to get going, and Mike Bobo this, Mike Bobo that. This will be a really good gauge for us with what they do against Auburn. Speaking of the gauge, this is a great gauge for where Auburn's at. I mean, for Auburn, this is the biggest home game of Hugh Freeze's early career at Auburn. And this is a great measuring stick for us with Auburn, just from the eye test. I was talking to a good buddy of mine that's an Auburn fan this week, and I asked him how he feels about the game against Georgia. And we said, feel not great about what I saw against Texas A&M, but we kind of landed on the same fact that, hey, Hugh Freeze is there for a reason. If Auburn was reeling off SEC championships, Hugh Freeze probably doesn't get hired to be your head coach. He's there trying to do a repair job. That's why they went to the transfer portal and brought in the guys that they did. So what I'm trying to say is, for Auburn, obviously you want to win the football game. We're going to tell you who we think wins the football game here in just a second. But I think the key thing, if I'm an Auburn fan that I'm watching, is how do we look? How do we stack up? Hey, how far off are we if that's the gold standard in college football, as Hugh Freeze said? So we'll see if they're off at all. I mean, we'll see if Auburn's able to find a way to get this thing done. But I think the spread in this one is what it is for a reason. Like, Georgia is double-digit favorites because they have the matchups and because of the way they've looked so far and because of what they've done the last couple of seasons. Like, there's going to take a little bit of something extra for Auburn to be able to win this football game. So as we like to say on this one, on these shows rather, the non-negotiables for Auburn to have a chance in this football game are two things. One, we need easy execution scheme offensively. And that sounds counterintuitive because you think, hey, JD, this is the game now. Like, this is the empty the chamber kind of game for us if we're Auburn. We got two offensive masterminds in Hugh Freeze and Philip Montgomery. Like, let's scheme it up here. Let's get fancy with it. I hear that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I do think there needs to be something to fall back on if you're Auburn. Like that, like there needs to be some bread and butter before you go to the exotic trick play, dial it up, go deep kind of approach for Peyton Thorne. I need him to be comfortable in this game. And it may not be flashy, it may not be fun to watch, but like, if all we have is quick game early, let's quick game Georgia to death. Let's give ourselves a chance on third down. Let's get to 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3. I don't know how I feel about them running the football against this operation for Georgia. I don't think that's probably the way you want to lean. I need easy execution offense for Peyton Thorne to get comfortable. Other thing, I need more possessions for Auburn. Sounds funny to say out loud, but I need more possessions for Auburn in this football game if they want to beat Georgia. Now, what does that look like? Could be turnovers. Hey, Carson Beck now, going to be a little bit loud in there. Can we make him rattled? Can we confuse him a little bit and force a turnover or two? Have to do it. Or do we steal one in special teams? Little fake punt action. Little onside kick, surprise onside. Start the first half, onside kick, boom, let's go. Got a possession now, got a little momentum. Need to touch the football more times than Georgia. There's no way around it for me. Has to happen. Going back to Carson Beck now, I'm very curious how he looks. I think the matchup is Carson Beck versus the attack mode approach of this Auburn defense. Because what we said about Auburn's offensive approach has to be easily executable, has to be in some way, shape, or form a little bit vanilla to watch. I don't think that's the case for the Auburn defense. For Auburn now, like, you're playing with house money. The spread is what it is for a reason. You got a first-year head coach. Like, you don't leave any bullets in the chamber defensively if you're Auburn. I want the most exotic blitzes. I want the safeties rocking and rolling, because you have a unique spot here against a quarterback making his first big-time start on the road. Like, this is the one. I'm not saying this is his first road start. I'm saying this is his first big-time start on the road for Carson Beck. For Beck now, it's easy to get discombobulated by the environment and by what Auburn's going to try and do with Ron Roberts as the DC and how aggressive they're going to be and the blitzes. Like, for him, it's got to be a thing of just easing into the football game. And as you ease into the football game, do not make the big mistake. Do not throw the pick six that sets us back 7-0, and now we're in chase mode, and his confidence is going down, and we got issues. Can't be any of that. I don't think Georgia has any panic in them, but it has to be embodied by Carson Beck as he gets comfortable in this football game. May need to lean on the run game a little bit. It might be a thing where, hey, first drive, we're running it like 70% of the time. And that's how we're going to get down, and that's what we're going to do to kind of quiet the crowd down. And we're going to lean on that. We love our big boys up front. I think it's a matchup Georgia has. Like, I think that might be the way they have to get him comfortable into this football game. And then once those safeties kind of start rocking and rolling and get committed to the run game, then we dial it up, and then we start to try and stretch the field vertically if we're Carson Beck. But it cannot be a thing where you make that crucial mistake that sends the whole thing into a tailspin. For Carson Beck, he has to be in control of this football game. This will be a tremendous test for him, obviously physically, but I think psychologically is really what I'm watching for him. Under the hood, what does he do when things get a little bit intense? Because it will be intense in Jordan-Hare. No way around it. It will be intense. If he does get rattled, if he does throw a pick, if he does make that mistake, how does he respond? What's the response muscle for Carson Beck? We're going to learn a lot about him in this game, and I cannot wait to see it. The thing you fear if you're Georgia is that big mistake happens. Again, that's a big assumption that the big mistake happens if he makes that mistake. And then Georgia has issues where he's out of whack and they become one-dimensional. A lot of ifs, a lot of potentials, a lot of woulda, shoulda, coulda. So there's a lot of hypotheticals baked in here, but the spread is what it is for a reason. And this is Carson Beck against this attack mode defense of Auburn that I think is going to ultimately determine a lot of the outcome of this game early. Now, the thing for Auburn, in my opinion, there has to be something mobile about this quarterback, whether it's Peyton Thorne, whether it's Robbie Ashford, against this Georgia defense. Because the Georgia defense, I think, just has every edge, quite frankly. I mean, you would hope someone can separate on the outside for you at the wide receiver position if you're Auburn. But I think for Georgia, it's not a thing where you can just walk out there and say, we like this matchup, let's go attack it. I don't think that exists. And so what you got to do is have a game plan breaker. Got to have Peyton Thorne have some wiggle. Got to have Robbie Ashford have some wiggle. I would not be surprised, and this is not to knock Peyton Thorne, this is just kind of the way the game I think could go. Would not be surprised if we see Robbie Ashford get handed the keys to this offense at some point during this football game. I don't wish that upon Peyton Thorne. I'm just curious because I saw the game against A&M and I felt like when Robbie Ashford was in the game, maybe it was a change of pace thing. Maybe it was A&M wasn't prepared for it thing. But it felt like the offense had a touch more direction with him running the football and with him operating that offense. We'll see if that holds true in this game. But you need to find some kind of edge. You need to have something that doesn't fit in the playbook for Georgia that you can take advantage of if you're Auburn. And make no mistake about it. Your quarterback on a broken play does not fit in the playbook. You can try and prepare for it. You can try and scheme up different solutions to it. But it's not a thing where you just expect your players to be ready for that. It's a very reactionary kind of scenario. So for Robbie Ashford, creating that could be a thing that takes advantage of this Georgia defense and could generate some offense. Now, the differentiator for me in this game and the disadvantage that I see for Auburn is that line of scrimmage. Like the big boys up front for Georgia, you watch them on tape, you watch Auburn on tape, and the push is just noticeable from Georgia on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And the thing for me is that may not be the differentiator in the first half, but in the third and fourth quarter, even if Carson Beck isn't putting together the best stat line, let's say he's like 17 for 31, touchdown a pick, like you can still go back to your offensive line and just say, hey, we're going to pound the rock. That's how we're getting out of here today. That's how we're going to go ahead and win this football game. I think we see Auburn scheme it up to the max defensively. I do think they throw the kitchen sink at Carson Beck. I think they get some kind of rhythm at some point in this game offensively that Georgia has to kind of put an end to. I think we see a little bit of a run here from Auburn at some point. Even so, though, I think the difference maker on top of the line of scrimmage for Georgia, could be what they have from a playmaker standpoint. Brock Bowers going to get a lot of attention. This is the game, I think, where we see Dominique Lovett really do some damage. And so I think Georgia wins this football game. I think the final score is 31-17 Dogs. And I think what we see in this game, that the big takeaway for me, if Georgia finishes this game with that score or plays the way that I expect them to play, we kind of see this Georgia football team really start to take shape in 2023. We see them really kind of become who we have expected them to be. I don't know if it's a final product, but we see them look more and more like they're going to have to look when it comes to games in November to beat the Ole Misses and to beat the Tennessees. So for Auburn, we talked about it at the top. It's house money. You're going to learn a lot about your team. You learn about how you stack up, but you don't overreact if you don't win the game against Georgia. And we already know that, but just want to make sure we got that out there in this prediction. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.